Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. So I want to kind of get us started by asking you guys a question, just a rhetorical question. Imagine what it would be like to teach a class of students in math where all the students were confident in their abilities to do math, where the students felt confident in their problem-solving ability, in their ability to do calculations, in their ability to do algebra, geometry, and all the math that they're learning. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? And it may not be possible to get 100% students to be confident in what they're learning of math, but we can get closer and we can get much better than what we have today by implementing a lot of these strategies that we're going to talk about in this talk today. So the reality is that Algebra 1 is the most commonly failed class at the high school level around the nation. In college, developmental math classes are the most commonly failed classes at the university level. And the most common courses that cause students to drop out of both high school and college are math classes, unfortunately. So mathematics is one of those things that a lot of students are struggling with. A lot of students struggle with math anxiety and learning math and all that. After reading, number sense is the second most important skill that we can have as a citizen, as a member of society. Very important number sense. I remember I was taking a class for my health minor when I was in college. It was a stress management class. And the teacher was telling us that 1 out of 2 people die of heart disease and 1 out of 3 people die of cancer. But the teacher told us that he didn't understand how that works out. How can 1/2 and 1/3, he thought it added up to be over 100%. And I can remember trying to explain to this person, this PhD in health, how that 1/2 is 50%, 1/3 is 33.3 repeating percent. When you add them up, you get 83.3 repeating percent. That still leaves about 17% for all the other things. And then he finally realized it. But even a lot of PhDs of people that have a lot of upper level degrees don't have good number sense skills. And that is not something that's good when your number sense skills aren't good and adequate, because in our society today, number sense is very important. And if your number sense isn't good, that means that you're going to struggle in a lot of areas that you may not even realize that you're going to struggle with. So what is math anxiety? It's basically just an anxiety like anything else. It's anxiety is a response to something that we fear. People with math anxiety fear math. Past experiences play a major factor in math anxiety, when a lot of people with math anxiety probably picked it up from past experiences when they were younger, in elementary school, in middle school. Most of them even got it before they got to high school. Students are aware of the importance and value of math to their success in future careers. And because of that, there's more pressure placed on them, and the math anxiety can increase because of that. So what are the potential causes of math anxiety? Well, one of them is lack of success in previous math classes. Most likely students didn't have a lot of success in their past math classes, and that can cause them to believe in their subconscious mind that they're not good at math, and that can lead to having math anxiety. Past incidences of feeling embarrassed in classes, prevented from accomplishing something that they've really wanted to accomplish due to math. And then hearing a lot of negative talk about math from others, maybe their parents, maybe family members, maybe even from other teachers that say that math is too hard for them, they're not good at math, and that math just doesn't come with people in their family, and that can oftentimes lead to math anxiety as well. Anxiety can happen, this math anxiety can happen before doing math. So if you know you have a math test coming up, for example, the anxiety can actually kick in before the math test. It can be days before, can be hours before, minutes before. That anxiety can kick in. It can be during the learning, such as when you're in math class, when you're problem solving. Maybe you're listening to the teacher lecture. Maybe you're taking a test. It can occur at that moment too. I remember when I was in high school and I ran track, I would get really nervous and anxious before a track race. And it would be days before a track race, and I'd be really anxious and nervous about that track race coming up. But the big difference is that in a track race, it's running. You're not actually having to think logically like you do in math. And that anxiety is going to really affect logical thinking a lot more than it would affect just having to run. So the anxiety would not affect running as much as it would affect math, because of the logical thinking that gets impaired with that goes with the anxiety. So now we have the video.
When French mathematician Laurent Schwartz was in high school, he started to worry that he wasn't smart enough to solve math problems. Maybe you know a similar feeling. You sit down to take a math test, and you feel your heart beat faster, and your palms start to sweat. You get butterflies in your stomach, and you can't concentrate. This phenomenon is called math anxiety, and if it happens to you, you're not alone. Researchers think about 20% of the population suffers from it. Some psychologists even consider it a diagnosable condition. But having mathematical anxiety doesn't necessarily mean you're bad at math. Not even close. Laurent Schwartz went on to win the Fields Medal, the highest award in mathematics. People might think that they're anxious about math because they're bad at it, but it's often the other way around. They're doing poorly in math because they're anxious about it. Some psychologists think that's because math anxiety decreases a cognitive resource called working memory. That's the short-term memory system that helps you organize the information you need to complete a task. Worrying about being able to solve math problems or not doing well on a test eats up working memory, leaving less of it available to tackle the math itself. People can suddenly struggle with even basic math skills like arithmetic that they've otherwise mastered. Academic anxiety certainly isn't limited to math, but it does seem to happen much more frequently and cause more harm in that subject. So why would that be? Researchers aren't yet sure, but some studies suggest that the way children are exposed to math by their parents and teachers play a large part. If parents talk about math like something challenging and unfamiliar, children can internalize that. Teachers with math anxiety are also likely to spread it to their students. Pressure to solve problems quickly dials up stress even more. And in some cultures, being good at math is a sign of being smart in general. When the stakes are that high, it's not surprising that students are anxious. Even Miriam Mizrakhani, an influential mathematician who was the first woman to win the Fields Medal, felt unconfident and lost interest in mathematics because her math teacher in middle school didn't think she was talented. So if you experience mathematical anxiety, what can you do? Relaxation techniques, like short breathing exercises, have improved test performance in students with math anxiety. Writing down your worries can also help. This strategy may give you a chance to re-evaluate a stressful experience, freeing up working memory. And if you have the chance, physical activity like a brisk walk deepens breathing and helps relieve muscle tension, preventing anxiety from building. You can also use your knowledge about the brain to change your mindset. The brain is flexible, and the areas involved in math skills can always grow and develop. This is a psychological principle called the growth mindset. Thinking of yourself as someone who can grow and improve can actually help you grow and improve. If you're a teacher or parent of young children, try being playful with math and focusing on the creative aspects. That can build the numerical skills that help students approach math with confidence later on. Importantly, you should give children the time and space to work through their answers. And if you're an administrator, make sure your teachers have the positive attitudes and mathematical confidence necessary to inspire confidence in all of their students. Also, don't let anyone spread the myth that boys are innately better than girls at math. That is completely false. If you experience math anxiety, it may not help to just know that math anxiety exists. Or perhaps it's reassuring to put a name to the problem. Regardless, if you take a look around yourself, the odds are good that you'll see someone experiencing the same thing as you. Just remember that the anxiety is not a reflection of your ability, but it is something you can conquer with time and awareness.
All right, thank you for that. So if you would type in the chat log, one thing that you took away from that video that maybe you didn't know, or one thing, that would be awesome while we're getting my screen back on. So just one takeaway maybe that you took in the chat log. I know for me, one of the things that I run into, even when I'm teaching math, is that if I'm teaching something and for whatever reason, maybe I make a mistake up on the whiteboard or I forget something, I get math anxiety right away. I get really anxious because I'm in front of students and I'm worried, what are these students going to be thinking? The teacher doesn't know how to do the problem. And I can feel like in my brain how my working memory is blocked. And all of a sudden, it actually happened to me the other day when I was teaching a stats lesson. I presented a formula and then we did this word problem. on Alex, and I remember I wasn't quite sure how to solve it the first time I read it. I wasn't quite sure what the problem was asking. It was more of a reading comprehension thing than anything. And I remember I was trying all these things on the whiteboard, and then all of a sudden the anxiety started kicking in. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, oh, we need to use that formula. And then I used it, and I remembered, oh yeah, that's the formula we need to use. And then it was not a problem. But even sometimes teaching, when I'm going through calculations with students, sometimes I get anxiety with that. And so even a math teacher sometimes can have math anxiety, or even a math professor can have anxiety while teaching when it comes to the calculation or explaining it to the students, and that can affect us. So math anxiety can be caused by parents talking about how unapproachable math can be. Very true. That we aren't alone. Other people go through it. That's very true. 20% of people have math anxiety. That's very true. The way math anxiety is perceived. And so very good. So strong points there. Awesome. All right, so effects on student learning. Stress and anxiety makes logical thinking difficult, right? Students are unable to retrieve the formulas and stored concept from their working memories. That's a big part. And then we get this panic and fear that sets in. Students are unable to perform to their full potential. Even when I was as a math major, I would get a lot of math anxiety during tests, especially tests that were timed. And even no matter how much I would study, I knew that if I would struggle with a problem or forget something, that would just make the anxiety worse. And a lot of times I was actually unable to finish tests on time because of that anxiety that would kick in. So at all different levels of people can suffer through math anxiety. So I'm sure you've heard of the fight or flight. And but basically what happens when you get in the fight or flight mode, so when you get an anxiety, your math anxiety kicks in, your brain goes into reptile mode. That's what I call it. And reptile mode is very good at getting out of situations that would involve like having to switch directions quick or fight something off or run away quick, but it's not so good at logical thinking. So when reptile mode kicks on in our brain, then logical thinking is impaired and we can't think logically. So even if you know the formulas and you know the material, your logical thinking is impaired. I think a lot of teachers have gone through that, high school teachers and middle school teachers, where if they teach a class and, every teacher's nightmare is an out of control classroom when the kids aren't moving along and they aren't working with you. And a lot of times when you shift your focus to trying to control and manage the class, all of a sudden you forget simple things as you're teaching the math with it. And that happens to the teachers sometimes when they're teaching, especially middle school, high school, where you got to control the students, manage the students, and present math at the same time. So the logical thinking part of our brain is impaired, making it difficult to learn math. So this is known as the York-Dodson law. It's like an inverted U, like a parabola with a negative in front of the x squared, as we would say. So the x-axis is like your pressure or anxiety. The y-axis is your performance. There's a certain amount of anxiety where you'll perform at the peak level, right? So not enough anxiety, not enough pressure makes some performance low because you have no motivation then to want to learn, But too much anxiety, too much pressure makes learning very difficult and causes your performance to drop. And this is true pretty much for any task that you're doing. It can be true whether you're playing golf, playing a sport, whether you're learning math or learning a subject. There's an optimal level of pressure that you need for performance to reach its peak level. Now, this is going to be different for different students. And this is also going to be different based on the task. We talked about how if the task is running, you can run typically even if you have under a lot of pressure. But it's hard to do something like math that requires intense concentration and focus and logical thinking if your anxiety levels are too high. So we want to create a classroom environment where the majority of students are here at their peak level of performance. So the question for us is, how do we create a classroom environment where there's enough pressure so students perform high, but not too much pressure so that performance starts to drop? And that's one of the things we want to look at. So myth or fact, students that are strong in math never have math anxiety. I think we learned from the video that's actually a myth because even Einstein had math anxiety. Even people that major in math have math anxiety. So it's a myth to think that it's something that only students that struggle in math get. Students that are not strong in math do not always have math anxiety, right? That's another end of it. It's not always that they struggle in math because of math anxiety. Maybe they're just misplaced or they're not placed in the proper course and they're not prepared or they just don't put an effort in. So when we talk about like the strategies we're going to talk about today, it's specific for students that suffer for math anxiety. They won't work necessarily for students that just are misplaced or aren't in the appropriate class or just struggle because of low skills. So can everybody, is everybody with me? Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. So just think about something that you fear, right? Maybe it's speaking, maybe it's giving a presentation. Think about something that you fear, and how does that fear make you feel physically or mentally? Would you be able to perform well in a task related to that fear? Now think about if you had to perform that task knowing that you had, or think about, would you be able to perform well in that task knowing that you had to deal with that fear? So think about like how that would affect your day-to-day life, or how that would affect your day if you knew you had to encounter that fear on a regular basis. So as many presentations as I've done, I always get a little anxiety that kicks in the day before, even a week before a presentation, even like the day of the presentation, right? And I think that anxiety is normal. I think that anxiety is a good thing. I think it shows that we care, but we have to be able to control that anxiety or it can kind of take us over. And I think the same thing kind of applies to our students in math class. So the reality is that students with math anxiety need to step into that fear every day. Students with math anxiety are threatened not to accomplish their goals because of their math anxiety. So that's their reality, that math class is something they have to get through. They have to deal with it. So the reality is that they have to go through their anxiety and their fear every day. So what doesn't help, if we start with that, is parents that remind their children that they were not good at math. There's no such thing as bad at math genes. And that's one of those things that sometimes people believe, that like you're either born good at math, you're either a math person, or you're an English person. All of that stuff is nonsense and really just reiterates to kids that they may not be good at math when that's not necessarily true. So math is like anything else. We can learn, we can grow, we can improve, and people need to realize that. So this negative talk about math, this idea that some are born bad at math, again, it's not true. Teachers that have no sympathy for students with math anxiety doesn't help as well. And when the problem is not diagnosed and there's no plan put in place to deal with the math anxiety, that can be a problem as well. Whereas in like a K-12 setting, that's something that should be in a plan as much as attention deficit disorder is, or reading disability is. So it's important that we address it and come up with a plan of attack to help that student reach their full potential in math class. So what does help is when we can provide a classroom environment where students are encouraged to learn from their mistakes. So how can we provide that classroom environment where failure is expected and students can actually learn from their mistakes and improve on their mistakes, giving students second chances, right? And I think that's one of the issues that a lot of students face, is that in math class, they typically, maybe in elementary school, got 20 problems of fractions. They've got 15 out of 20 correct. So then they got a 70, 6, well, whatever it comes out to be as a percent. And then they believe that they weren't very good at math because of it. So maybe they got a C, and then they believe that they weren't good at math to begin with. And that can be a problem as well. So a teacher that's willing to explain concepts to students and offers to support students individually, that can really help students with math anxiety as well. A teacher that uses humor regularly and appropriately during class. So again, using that humor, creating that fun classroom atmosphere can really make a big difference. And students see that their teacher has something to them besides just math, and they can relate to the teacher. So if the teacher can relate to the students, that makes a big difference. Not cold calling, not just randomly calling on a student that suffers from math anxiety, because that puts them under the pressure, and that doesn't help as well. Building relationships with students, not using math as intimidation, can make a big difference as well. And then exercise can help as well before class, even during class. A quick 1 minute, 2 minute exercise break of some sort can make a big difference. Meditation can make a big difference as well, if that's practiced regularly. So all those things can definitely help students that have math anxiety. So consider trying relaxation exercises, meditation, guided imagery, deep breathing, all of that stuff. And I would encourage that to be done before learning math. It can be done like an hour before, 30 minutes before, or even like if you're in the middle of a math session and you take 5 minutes to do a deep breathing exercise, that can make a big difference. Taking an exercise break, taking a 2-minute walk, or just having a student walk to get a drink of water can make a difference. Allowing them movement can really help reduce anxiety as well. Limiting lecture and giving them opportunities to perform problems on their own, checking in on them, scaffolding them along can make a big difference. Like trying to simulate the environment that they'll go through with the test. So maybe giving them 2 or 3 questions, giving them 10 minutes to do those 2 or 3 questions, and then going over the answers to try to get them to practice what the testing environment would be like during the test. Providing a warm, caring, nurturing classroom environment that encourages second chances, giving them second chances if they don't do well on quizzes, or even allowing them to redo a test or do corrections for some points back, can really help reduce anxiety in a lot of students as well. So the biggest thing we can do is help students build confidence. And we want to make sure that we place students in the appropriate math class for that. If students are in a class where they're overplaced, they can lose confidence in that. So we want to make sure that we allow them to see confidence and see themselves successful in math as much as possible. So giving them praise when they do well, even when they just get the first step right, praising them for that. So encouraging them as much as possible and meeting them where they're at, like meeting the students where they're at and showing and teaching them from there can make a big difference as well. So other key things that we can do, movement opportunities during lessons. So creating lessons that allow them to move during the lessons and giving them opportunities to get some exercise in during the lesson can make a big difference. Keeping assessments shorter, not necessarily giving these super long tests all the time, but giving them shorter assessments, giving them immediate feedback and allowing them to learn from their mistakes really creates an environment where they don't feel as bad when they get questions wrong because they get to correct them and learn from that. Providing a relaxing environment for students with group work, flexible seating, allowing them opportunities to work in groups and work with people that they like to work with as well can make a difference. Music during independent work time can really help. So allowing students to listen to music, that can help relieve anxiety. Music has been shown to reduce anxiety. And so it matters about the music as well, but listening to soothing music can make a big difference. We talked about simulating that assessment environment, and I think that can make a big difference. A lot of times students, well, think about it, when students are taking a test, they don't take a lot of tests. As much as they think they take a lot of tests, they really don't. So if we can simulate a testing environment, even for a few minutes during class, here's some practice test questions. Let's simulate the testing environment, no talking, just work on the questions as if this were a test, and then going over that with them, that can help reduce anxiety by simulating the environment that they'll experience. So then they're more used to that environment. Encouraging, again, that failure is part of the learning process. I'm very sorry. Here we go. Encouraging that failure is part of the learning process and giving them second chances as much as possible. And I think that's what brings in a lot of anxiety, is that the students in the past have not had a lot of success in math and they haven't been given second chances, and they've just been told that it's either right or wrong, and then they may get a bad score, and I think that causes a lot of the anxiety that they get as well. I think we also want to look for ways to make math more fun. There's so many different fun things in math. There's so many different ways to make math fun that I think we want to look for ways of bringing more fun into math class. So puzzles, fun math challenges, group problem solving, all that kind of stuff. And that's where I think our traditional math program of algebra, geometry, algebra 2, pre-calc, I think a lot of that causes us to miss a lot of the fun in math. But we can also include fun in math within those classes. You can do different puzzles in algebra class. You can do different challenges. And saying, I don't expect anyone to get this question right the first time, but let's just try it. Even putting up some of those fun problems that you see on social media and stuff, where how many triangles are in the picture, things like that really get them thinking mathematically, and doing that periodically, not necessarily for the whole class, but maybe take 5 minutes and do something like that, I think can help relieve a lot of the anxiety as well. Giving students perhaps more choice in what they learn if possible. So if they're doing statistics, there's ways of including more choice in statistics. You can look at data from sports. You can look at data from marketing. All sorts of different ways to do that. Again, what really matters, what we're really trying to do is that get students to learn to their full potential. So we're trying to get students to build confidence in their mathematical skills, learn to their full potential. And that's what a lot of these strategies do. The math anxiety doesn't allow them to learn to their full potential. And by doing these strategies, we increase the chances that they'll learn to their full potential, that they'll build more confidence in their ability. So there was an article that I read a while back And it talks about the two things that you need to learn math. There's only two things. Number one is a curiosity to want to learn more math. And number two is a willingness to learn, that growth mindset. And I put on there, we don't need grade level benchmarks to learn math. Like, I know we do grade level benchmarks, but that's not necessary to learn a skill or learn math. And I compare it to like fitness. Like for me, my flexibility is really bad, but I still work on my flexibility. I still try to improve it. And I think we need to approach math the same way, where it's something that we're working on a regular basis. We're trying to get better. We realize that people are at different levels, students are at different levels, but we're meeting students where they're at. We're trying to get them to improve. If you had a class like in physical education, run a mile, you would have some students running it in 20 minutes, some students running it in 5 minutes, right? But so you'd have a wide variety of students, and you get to see that if they're running a mile. But we don't always see that in math class. We don't see the variety of levels that we have because you can't see what they're thinking. And the reality is in a lot of classes, we have a variety of levels, even at the college level. And we have to take that into account. So we really want to instill that curiosity, that love of learning, and the willingness to want to learn more math in the students. So this is just kind of a fun question. What grade and what concept causes the most students to dislike math? And that typically happens in elementary school around third grade when they get introduced to fractions. That's where a lot of students really dislike math. And I believe in a lot of the articles I've read where a lot of that math anxiety kicks into play is when they're learning fractions at an early level. That can kick on a lot of math anxiety for a lot of students. So a little bit about my dissertation, the effects of exercise on math anxiety. The study design was qualitative, and there was 3 stages to it. I sent out a questionnaire for undergraduate students at a university to complete, assessing their exercise routines and what types of exercising they did, were they in a sport, and all that. Then looking at their math anxiety, their perception of math anxiety. Then I chose 10 to 11 students to interview, and I did one-on-one interviews with them, and I tried to really get at how their exercise habits influence their math anxiety, their perception of their math anxiety, like before learning math, during learning a math, and after learning a math. And then the third thing I did was I did a focus group where I had 4 students in a focus group, and I threw softball questions at them to try to get at how exercise has worked for them in the past and how exercise can influence their perception of math anxiety. The results were that the best types of exercise to do are just wellness-based exercises, so not competition-based, not sports practices, but just everyday wellness-based exercises, as simple as walking, going to the exercise facility at the university, and just engaging in an exercise routine just for general health can really help students' perception of math anxiety before, during, and after math. So exercise can help perception. That's what I learned from my dissertation. And again, the best types of exercises to do are the wellness-based exercises, not necessarily the competition-based exercises, not necessarily the exercises that where the students are going to be competing or trying to reach a certain goal, but just going out and just exercising for general health. So those are a few of the books that I wrote. If you're interested in that, a couple books on health. This is an exercise program that people can go through that definitely can help with math anxiety. That's my information on social media, my email. If anybody has any questions on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Dr. Mueller's Voice. So that's my social media contact. And with that, I'll take us some questions. I think I wrapped up a little earlier than what I normally do. But yeah.
Thank you. First, let's give Dr. Mueller a round of applause. Thank you. And does anyone have some questions? So I have a question. So one thing you mentioned that saying a lot of the students start developing math anxiety when they are like a third grader or maybe younger when they start learning fractions. Then would you suggest they should start learning fractions earlier or later? So which would be a better way in your opinion, or have you seen students doing different things?
Well, I think it's the way that fractions are taught. Specifically, when we teach fractions, I think if we use more pictures, showing them the parts of the whole, all of that, I think that would be kind of the way to start. I think and I'm not 100% sure what they do now compared to what they did when I was in elementary school, but when I was in elementary school, it was very much just written out, 2 out of 5, 2/5 plus 7/10, get a common denominator, that way. Where I think if we looked at maybe going through how we introduce fractions to students, introducing it with more pictures, things like that, that might be better in terms of what we do. So I really think it's all about the presentation. I think a lot of teachers, unfortunately, at the elementary level, aren't always necessarily like math teachers, and I think that can sometimes come into play as well, where they might just kind of go through the steps without actually kind of looking at explaining the concept of fractions to the students. So I don't know that I'd necessarily say we want to teach them later, but I think looking at really how we teach them, how we present it, and maybe making sure they really understand what the fractions actually mean. In addition to that, using pictures with the problems as much as possible, I think can really help.
Right. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I have a kid in third grade right now, and we actually started him on math pretty early. He understood fractions even starting in kindergarten, but those are very like I basically break up the graham crackers into 1/4, 1 and 1/2, and then that's how he understood the fractions, just using graham crackers. So I totally agree that using the pictures, they see like 1/2 a pie or 1/4 of a pizza. That's how they can see the fractions. And my kid, he's totally fine with fractions, but I do heard, because they're starting fractions in third grade, and I heard his teacher saying that this is a big topic. They're making it sound so important that a lot of students are not going to like it. So it's interesting that you mentioned that actually fraction might be one of the things that get student anxiety, which I wasn't aware of.
We have a couple of questions I saw in the
Yep.
comments. So I can read. We'll start with Christopher's. It says, how do you account for students with different coping mechanisms? For example, you mentioned music helping to help calm students, but what could you do if some students find music extremely distracting from being able to do math and they are in the same room? That's a great question. I would say one of the things like I do is some students that I know might need an exercise break, I just let them go get a drink of water, go run this paper to the office for me. At the college level, they know that they can do that anytime anyways. High school level, they always have to ask for permission to leave the room. As far as the music is concerned, you always try to allow the strategy to run with minimizing the effect of everybody else. So I would say like headphones, or allowing them to, listen to music with headphones on and turning it down so that nobody else can hear them as well. I think is the best way to go, is just you take advantage of the technology with that. And sometimes you have to kind of decide on the instructional decisions that are going to help your class run the best. So, if you can have lessons designed where there's more movement involved, great. But that might not always be possible. So I hope that helps you out there, Chris, with that. Anna says, hello, I'm a science teacher. I'm finding that my students' math skills in physics are very mechanic. They might have learned some processes, steps, but I do not see the thinking skills to internalize and apply the math to solve the problems. What could I do to help my students in physics? So that question is probably just a general math teaching question in general. I don't know that that connects to math anxiety a whole lot. I guess it does in a way, because perhaps the math anxiety is what's causing them not to apply those mechanic skills that we're talking about. But I think for that, the way that I would look at that is just force students to problem solve. Unfortunately, the way math has been taught at most schools in the past is through routine memorization, right? And like you do 20 problems related to this skill that you just learned. And I think what we want to do is get them to have to think more, get them to do word problems and force them to actually have to think, and force them to come up with the equations. And probably they want to do a little bit of both, but I would say that's just more of a curriculum issue, and that the school district would really want to make sure, would look at, okay, what type of math are we teaching in our middle school classes and our algebra classes, and are we really forcing them to have to problem solve as opposed to just rote memorize and do kind of the drill and kill method. So I think what you can do at your current moment is just kind of work with the students on that, maybe do a couple of problems together, and then make them problem solve a little bit more in groups and individually. But that's how I would approach that. But I've noticed the same thing with my students is they tend to not want to have to problem solve a whole lot. And again, in our traditional algebra, geometry, algebra 2, sometimes it's taught in a way that does more drill and kill. The one class that I'm teaching, a statistics class at a university, that requires them to have to read more to actually apply the reading to the formulas that they're learning, which I think is more in tune for that. So that's how I would go about that with that question. Yep. So I think that's all the questions in the comment section at this moment.
I've got one more. So do you
Sure.
think, is it ever too late, like to start help student build a curiosity? I'm teaching some Gen Ed math courses as well, and in the class I see a divide. There are students who are really curious about the content that's being taught, and sometimes try to bring puzzles. Some of the probability questions are more like puzzles. And there are students who are really interested, but there are students who are just like, why am I learning this? There's no point. So is there a time that's too late to help students build curiosity? Or
Never, never. Because the thing of it
strong?
is, I'm sorry, you were still asking. It's never too late because think about yourself. Like I think about myself. When I was learning history in school, I hated it. Because I had a teacher that just clicked, 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 made us memorize dates and facts. Whereas now I go to a history museum and I'm like a history nerd. I'm walking around trying to like learn all this history, trying to make sense of it all. So I've kind of developed a curiosity and interest for history into my 40s, into my 30s and 40s. So I think sometimes that's just how the growth mindset kind of works. You're a teenager, you think differently, you're going through different stages. And then all of a sudden you get older and that brain matures, because when does our brain fully mature? They say that the frontal lobe of our brain doesn't fully mature until we're 25. And then all of a sudden, maybe the math actually makes more sense to the students. And then all of a sudden they become more interested in it, more curious. I've taught a lot of developmental college math classes at community colleges. In a lot of those classes, I've gotten some students that are older, not traditional college students, and they have their math curiosity started like right in that class. So I've definitely have seen that before. So I don't think it's ever too late to develop an interest in learning math. I think we go through different things at different points of our life, and at some point, for some people, it just comes later on.
Right. What are some strategies you could suggest, maybe trying to help students who are uninterested, come in uninterested, and to get them interested?
That's a great question. I think just trying to make math as fun as possible. So coming up with fun activities, looking at puzzles. We talked about that. Even putting up like starting off with just a fun challenge math puzzle question. Like I've seen a lot of them online. Like how many different triangles do you see in this picture? And then talking about how you solved it too. Like what were the different strategies that you used to solve it? Looking at trying to relate the math to their lives too. If you're teaching a class, like when I teach my stats class, I try to do a lot of quick class surveys. Okay, raise your hand if you like this better. Raise your hand if you like this better. And then putting the results up on the board and using those results into the lesson. And the students seem a lot more interested in that. And just trying to stay, to be energized as a teacher, I think can really make a big difference too. And to allow the students to kind of see the connection to this and their life, I think makes a big difference as well. So that if we can relate the material and what we're teaching them to their life, I think that can make a big difference.
Okay.
Well, Ben, I mean, this is great. Especially you talk about a growth mindset. I think, this is, not just for math, many of the students that, it's interesting. You talk about, you yourself, go through that phase, you didn't like history, and now you're, like a history nerd. And also the way you think about so many different, activities to make it interesting, make it fun. I think that's wonderful. That's really that's great. That's
And you
really
saw my math anxiety kick in a little bit too when I was doing the 15 over 20. Remember that? And I was trying to think of what 15 over 20 is as a percent. And if I'm sitting here by myself, I know that's 75%. But when I'm speaking in front of a group of 11 math professors, I get a little nervous, you know?
Right,
And
right,
the
right,
anxiety
right.
kicked in and I just said, well, whatever the percent is.
In
So,
fact, I guess, you know, the anxiety thing is not, it's so true, you know, there are many areas that, you know,
yeah,
we, maybe by ourselves, we are doing okay. But whenever we're doing it, you know, in front of other people and
makes a
we're, you
big
know,
difference.
in an environment that we don't feel comfortable, it really, hinder or limit our ability to process informations in a way that, you know, is being effective and smoothly. And I think it's so true. It's so true.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's
Thanks
hard
for
to
sharing that.
imagine that you have anxiety before you speak.
It is. Well, no, I get anxiety. Even like this little presentation today, I was nervous waking up this morning and, well, there was a saying in speaking, and I read this speaking book and there's a saying, number one is there's two people. There's people that get anxious before a speech, and then there's liars. Like everybody gets anxious, no matter who you are, whether you admit it or not. We all get nervous the first day of class, right? Because, you know, and even sometimes the second day and the third day.
Right. You mentioned that, you know, we should put some, you know, give them the opportunity to move around, some motion, some movement, you know, help them to ease their nerve and also simulate, you know, that assessment environment so they get used to it, you know, reduce the anxiety, you know, help them to basically feel better. So in fact, they will, you know, learn better and do better in the class, you know, feel better about, you know, that learning experience. That's really great. That's really great.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I know it was a little shorter than I had thought, but I didn't quite go to the 40-minute mark.
No, yeah. So I do have another questions. I like how you said that there are the two things that affect learning, that a student can learn math as long as one, if they're interested or if they're willing to learn. Because I had a student who had learning disabilities, but the student worked really hard and really come to my office hour every week and tried hard to learn. And in the end, the student did pretty well in the class. So I really see that it's the willingness of learning and the curiosity. That's two very important things that a student could have. And
Well, just think about how much math we can teach. We can teach so much math, and there's so many different areas of math. And I really think that structure of algebra, geometry, algebra 2 turns off a lot of students where we have the discrete math and graph theory.
Mhm.
And even like I used to teach a discrete math class and we learned graph theory, we learned election theory, all the different ways of doing a voting in elections and, you know, fun problems that came up. And most students never see that because we ingrain them so much with algebra and geometry. And then they realize, oh, I don't like math because I didn't like solving for X or I didn't like X squared. And so I think that's a big part of it too, is allowing them to see success, see confidence.
all right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? Okay, well, if you have any more questions, you can send your questions to me and I will forward it to Dr. Mueller. And let's give another round of applause and thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mueller. Thanks for the presentation. It's wonderful.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Thank you.